Oppenheimer has now released on 4K and physical media, and on top of getting a spectacular presentation of the 3-hour film, a bonus disc also includes 3 hours of special features. There's a Q&A and a documentary on there which was already released in the build-up to the film's theatrical launch, but all the other featurettes give us new behind-the-scenes footage and details from the film's production. Having now watched that material, I think it acts as a fascinating deep dive into the effort that the cast and crew went to in creating this all-time cinematic classic. And I must say, I think it's one of the best 4K releases I've ever seen. So in this video, I'm going to be detailing what was learnt in these special features about the making of Oppenheimer, and while doing so, there will be footage from it on screen. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my future content surrounding Oppenheimer and Christopher Nolan's future projects, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. But without further ado, let's dive into the making of Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. So at the beginning of the behind the scenes for Oppenheimer, we get introductions from director Christopher Nolan, producer Emma Thomas, and actor Cillian Murphy as they talk about the importance of taking on this kind of project and what for each of them was the particular element. Director Christopher Nolan began by highlighting that his film, like some of his previous movies, poses the discussion of why people do what they do versus whether they should have. In mentioning the case of Oppenheimer, its subject matter, and how that relates to the real world, he said, "The threat of nuclear weapons has never gone away," and Emma Thomas added to this that Oppenheimer is a reflection of the world in alarming ways. From here, Nolan started to talk about the structure of his film and why the approach of different tones from different genres was a big part of that structure. Nolan mentions that at Oppenheimer's script stage, the movie was broken down into 3 parts. One is discovering Oppenheimer as a miracle of science, the next was the mission he became a part of and a somewhat heist plot, and the last was a courtroom drama. He said that the movie is essentially structured within its own trinity of genres, with elements of horror, elements of the western, and then elements of pure drama. This led on to chapter 2 of the special features, where we began to transition to Cillian Murphy as he talked about the process of playing a version of Oppenheimer based on the history and resources available to him. The actor said, "The real Oppenheimer had interviews and footage that reflected him in performance mode. I had to adapt and do my own take on it in the best way I could, one that would tap into the man and the emotions behind that performance." Emma Thomas then noted that the whole thing hinges on Cillian's performance. There was no showboating because everything was grounded yet impactful. And Nolan added, "I wanted to surround Cillian with the greatest actors to push him. They are all historical figures of consequence, regardless of how big their roles are in this story." So from those opening 2 chapters of the behind the scenes, we don't learn too much more than what we've heard before about the film, but it was interesting to hear about what they were up against and the central methods they took in finding a way to make this film possible. The multi-genre approach that Nolan talks about is of course evident, but it's also something that if isn't executed correctly, things could go extremely wrong in tone and pacing. When it comes to Cillian, like it was mentioned, he also had a hell of a task because there was no intimate footage to go on, and he had to tap into what this man must have been feeling in the individual moments we see on screen. As we saw in the film, his Oppenheimer uses moments of silence, expressions, and the work of his eyes and soul to make the audience only question what he must have been feeling. On top of this, moments of dialogue give us a deeper insight into his actual thoughts, and in certain moments, it all helps to build a bigger portrait of the man behind the tapes we've seen in history. So Cillian's method to performance is very effective at translating both Oppenheimer's inner and external mindset, and the opening to this behind the scenes really taps into into that in an effective way. Moving on, Chapter 3 of the Making of Oppenheimer gave us a glimpse into the process of using IMAX film, the challenges of that, and a deeper insight into the VFX department and why they took on the experiments that they did. We learnt that there was a huge collaboration with IMAX and hundreds of hours of work to make that format possible with this kind of film. Just like all the other IMAX productions Nolan's put out, there are difficulties of working with the medium, and these include the noise of the cameras and shooting heavy dialogue scenes. They used 65mm film side by side with the format and mention how they planned effectively to cut between the two so that both would be used for what they are best for. Cinematographer Hoyte van Hoytema said, "We were curious to discover the intimacy of IMAX, get it to work close to people." We get clips of Hoytema launching an IMAX camera onto his shoulder to film the actors up close, and based on how we've seen IMAX used before, it's definitely a somewhat revelation to see the medium be used in this particular way. Robert Downey Jr. added in reference to this that as an actor it wakes you up when you have these massive lenses right in front of your face, and having to act with the noise of the camera being so loud, it is a big challenge to work against. He did also say that it was like being a part of great film school, and it took him back to the cinema he grew up with. Speaking of taking it back, when it now comes to the VFX chapter, we also got footage of that department carrying out many practical and analog experiments to produce the visuals inside of Oppenheimer's head. They put an IMAX camera inside tight areas and containers to capture some of these experiments and the shots of particles swirling that we'd see in the movie. Other analog examples includes that of Nolan spinning an atom device in front of Cillian at bedside, and this imagery was essentially seen in camera during the Can You Hear the Music sequence. There was also a really interesting look at how they would photograph the background of a scene and then project and shake it behind Cillian to create the psychological shift that we see in the Trinity speech scene. And when it came to filming the Trinity test itself, it was also clear that the director and his production crew wanted to film that for as real as possible. Nolan said that computer graphics will never give you that sense of threat, and when it comes to Trinity and its real life footage, that has to have weight. They essentially wanted to use real photography to capture both the beauty and terror of the moment all at the same time, and pushing the CGI button would not translate that as effectively. One of the bigger aspects of this whole behind the scenes was actually the details we got towards the realistic filming of Oppenheimer's locations in Chapter 4 and the costume design in Chapter 5. When it comes to the production, designer Ruth de Jong talked again about using many different visual references and real footage to recreate props and the overall settings. They didn't want to over-design these because of the restrictions of the period, and it was about scaling everything back for that. Buildings were rough to reflect the real place, and an example given was how ceiling tiles in rooms at the Los Alamos camp were worn down and fitted out of place to reflect the nature of the environment being worked in. When it came to the sets, they built Los Alamos from scratch at Ghost Ranch based on a detailed 3D model with every telephone pole and building planned before filming. Matt Damon said, "I don't think filming on the volume or sound stages is the future. Putting people in real locations that are there helps the performances that much more." It was further noted that they played with perspective a lot when it came to these sets so that things would look a certain way in the background of shots. For example, there was a security tower overlooking the base at Los Alamos, so they built their version on top of a higher, rockier surface in the distance to make it look much taller in the background. Another thing is that they couldn't film at the real Trinity test site, so like with the work they did at Los Alamos, they built it all from scratch and did so many miles away on empty land with similar attributes in its setting. They rebuilt the bunker as best as they could, and as seen through the small windows inside, they also built the 102 feet Trinity Test Tower and the gadget that lies there. They even redressed roads around Oppenheimer's real house and at Fuller Lodge, and redecorated his office at Princeton. Robert Downey Jr. said, "The Princeton scenes are the rosebud of this story, and we needed to make sure that these locations were used effectively, both in production and in performance from the actors." Again, they played with perspective here at the lakeside, and essentially showed how far these figures are away from each other in different scenes to showcase the moments and perspectives that dictate history. The two parts of this chapter that really stood out to me though from a production standpoint were actually the filming of Oppenheimer's later trial scenes and the process they went through in filming the Oval Office sequence with Gary Oldman. In the featurette, we learnt that they used a storage room at last minute to film the many scenes of Oppenheimer's trial. Nolan says that they almost hated doing so because it was really cramped in there and also extremely hot for the crew. It was further interestingly compared to what happened in reality because Oppenheimer felt a similar way, but even more so, having to go to this tiny room off the radar and be grilled on his policies and involvement in nuclear weapons. The crew said that they were extremely proud of the work they pulled off, but didn't deny that it was exhausting, tough and tiring. And when it comes to the Oval Office scene, this was apparently the only moment in the movie shot on a studio set, as they weren't given the access to film on another set that they wanted to use. They had to contact NBC or ABC to get a pack-up version of the Oval Office, which included the corridors around it, and they had only 5 days to set it up and shoot the scene. They had to repaint surfaces, touch up some paintings, and make the whole place seem like an earlier version of that location from decades prior. When you watch the behind the scenes footage, it seemed miraculous that they were able to pull this off based on what they were working with, and as seen in the movie, it ended up being a highly effective scene that you would think was actually filmed on location. When it comes to the costume design in Chapter 5, Cillian began by explaining how there was no colorized photo of Oppenheimer available and that the real figure was very consciously creating his own costume. Like Oppie, all the characters had 4 or 5 different looks because of the periods that the film would highlight, and this was even more important due to them using the IMAX format, as any mistakes would be shown on screen. So they didn't just have to think about how the performance would be in the given time periods, but also how the design of their characters would reflect and complement those performances. The production design, the costumes, the intimate filming with IMAX cameras, and the development of the performances shows that they were fully up against it, both in adapting the American Prometheus book well and really putting their own stamp on the history of Oppenheimer and the topics it deals with. Oppenheimer, its cast and crew, explained how they had to be fearless like their director in pulling off the tasks that the production posed. Nolan specifically wrapped it up by saying that all the crew members, all the cast were bringing their very best to the table to tell an important story, and with these talented people coming to you with thought, passion, really caring about what they are doing, and not coming to just make another film, they really wanted to make this something special. So that was most of the special features we got on the principal production, but there was one other featurette on the making of Oppenheimer's score, and if you've watched Nolan's special features for his other films, this is normally one of the most looked forward to featurettes of the bunch. Ludwig Göransson and Nolan spoke about the choices of instruments and the way in which they were used for the music on the film. Ludwig said, "Chris wanted the violin to portray Oppenheimer, and violin can be beautiful and horrifying all at the same time." And you definitely hear that reflected in the tracks for the film, having the more eloquent music play during Oppenheimer's scientific rise, and then the more haunting stuff played during the bomb test and the grilling trials throughout. There was a few other interesting things to point out, such as the moment where Ludwig describes his wife Serena playing a few violin notes in one experimental test. He recorded her playing this, sent it to Chris, and he said in reply that this music had to be Oppenheimer's theme. They built on from that and then began testing with and using different instruments to complement the tones and genres of the movie. In comparison to the violin, Kitty and Oppenheimer's theme was played on piano, and Ludwig described it as a more intimate and connecting piece of music. There was further both a use of organic and alienistic sounds to represent the science in the film, and the small segment on black holes where Cillian's Oppenheimer, his brother Frank, and Lawrence are in Los Alamos for a camping trip. Ludwig also mentioned that Chris asked him to score the courtroom drama music like an action piece, and they focused on the tempos of the music, playing it and experimenting with it at different speeds to reflect the mood of the piece in many given scenes. So this reflects the idea mentioned by Nolan in the beginning of these special features, where he was aiming to cover many different genres and tones within one historical movie. Nolan's final quote on the score was, "I think Ludwig's work on the film is deeply personal and historically expansive, and I think it really achieves an enormous amount of the effect of drawing the audience in to the emotional dilemmas of the characters. I think he's really put together a remarkable score." But that was my video breaking down the new details shared by Christopher Nolan and his cast and crew during the making of his latest film Oppenheimer. Again, I thought the deeper look into the processes behind the film was excellent, and compared to Nolan's other 4K releases, this has to be up there as one of his absolute best. You can tell there's a huge amount of care and passion put into this version of the film, and when it comes to my rating of it, it has to be a 10 out of 10 for both the video and audio presentation. I'd 100% recommend watching the film on 4K disc over the other streaming options, and on top of the main feature looking amazing with the added IMAX ratios, you're able to keep it forever and get an extra treat with the plethora of special features included. But what did you think of the details surrounding the special features on the 4K Blu-ray, and were you as impressed as I was when it comes to the presentation of the film on physical media? Let me know down below in the comment section. For much more videos and updates on the work of Christopher Nolan, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like, rating, and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.